What's your vision for this? Because this is change the world kind of thing.
And these devices, they learn your demand patterns. They understand your supply situation, understand how much solar you got available, they understand pricing on the grid, and they figure out when to turn your appliances on and off such that you get the service that you want, but you use the cheapest or the least amount of electricity possible.
We believe that what we're building is quite unique and novel and has relevance in multiple markets. We've identified what those markets are, and we have been successful in securing a few pilots in foreign geographies. And it'll be up to us over the next while to convert those pilots into commercial contracts and hopefully start to scale in markets outside of SA.
You were very much solar. Then obviously there was the hotpot geyser side of things, and then the software. That's a lot of money, right? And even just on the R&D side of things, and then also again from an OpEx perspective, just to constantly develop these units.
What's quite cool about our technology is that in addition to delivering cheaper services to people, enabling better ROI solar plants, it also fixes the grid for everyone.
Fast forward to today, we've got an organization of about 50 people and about 12 or 13 folks that are in leadership positions. And it's important to include them in the decision making. One, because just generally more IQ points around the table leads to better outcomes, but also in order to build buy-in for the direction and the way forward.
You said early on that someone gave you the advice to domicile in SA, and that was not a great decision, to kind of put it lightly. Talk me through that. Hello and welcome back to the Founder Files. Today I'm chatting to Jon Kornik and Kailas Nair, the co-founders of Plentify. If you haven't heard of Plentify, essentially what Plentify is they've got two IoT devices, one for geysers, one for solar, and they've got one software platform to help manage your energy between these devices, essentially bringing down costs for property developers, solar installers, and end consumers and homeowners. They're scaling at an absolute rate of knots. They're throwing numbers around like 8x, 9x from last year. So we get into their story of, pre-COVID, pivoting the business model, the complexities of having hardware, having software as a business, the challenges of traction like any business, but then going through COVID, how that accelerated them with the solar demand and solar space in South Africa. There's even challenges around fundraising and domiciling, how they originally domiciled in South Africa, and now it's turning to be quite an effortful and costly exercise to re-domicile overseas, how they're going about handling it. And we also just talk about the challenges in this domain and in this industry. We get deep dive around really understanding a lot more about solar, how geysers are such a energy consumption that I totally underestimated, but there's so many possible solutions out there for growing energy problems, not just South Africa, but globally, right? And why this is such an exciting business. So for them, they are really on a rocket ship at the moment, but they've only just hit the tip of the iceberg, and there's so much more to come. So if you want to hear more stories like this, or if you want to make sure that you stay tuned to round 2 when these guys have hit, proper international global status, make sure that you click follow, subscribe, or like to the Founder Files now, so you don't miss any epic stories from founders like Jon and like Kailas. And, if we end up doing round 2 or round 3, then you don't miss that either. It's also the best way to support the podcast and the best way to make me as the host happy. So click that button now. So thank you for being here. Let's get straight into the conversation with Jon and Kailas. Welcome to the Founder Files, the podcast that's like eavesdropping on a conversation with a successful entrepreneur over a fireside chat. Join me, Cameron Coots, through this unique experience of unfiltered stories and insights from scaling founders around the globe as they share their ups, downs, and everything in between.
As Jon mentioned, we obviously serve the user through this home energy management service. But the other piece that we're trying to solve is how we can harness all these appliances that we connect for the benefit of the grid more generally. And what's important to note here is that if you look at the biggest problem that utilities face is this mismatch between energy supply versus energy demand. And on the supply side, you have increasing intermittency and volatility. I mean, we're familiar with that in South Africa, where we've experienced shocks on the supply side through load shedding, but also as more renewables come onto the grid, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, so there's intermittency there. And then on the demand side, demand isn't flat. You see these peaks in the mornings and evenings. So if you look at it from a utility standpoint, they're trying to match intermittent supply with variable demand. And that's quite a complex challenge. And you can solve that through focusing on the supply side, say, for example, by building diesel power plants, which are expensive and obviously polluting, but they ramp up fast to cater for those peaks in demand. Or you could take the approach that Plentify is taking, which is by focusing on the demand side and by shifting and smoothing those peaks, particularly of these residential appliances that we're looking to control. And our belief is that if you can focus on the demand side, you can actually do this much more cheaply and sustainably than by building expensive polluting power plants, which is what we've historically had to do.
Yeah, makes perfect sense, guys. I just want to unpack it a little bit more practically. Like, how does your product suite work? Right? So you talk, obviously, there's energy management systems. You talk about devices. Pretend I haven't done any research on you. Talk to me about what those are, and a little bit maybe about the founding story then too.
Okay, sure. Can I tell you an analogy as well, just to describe the product, and then I'll describe the product itself.
Go for it.
I find this analogy quite useful, and because it's one that everybody understands, they suffer from almost every day, and that's the road network. And because there's surprisingly a lot of similarities or parallels between the road network and the electricity network. If you think about the road network, it sucks driving to work at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. in the morning because it's peak hour. There's just way too many cars on the road for that road's capacity. But what's interesting is if you kind of took the average number of cars driving on the road over the course of the day, the roads wouldn't be that constrained. It's because everybody wants to drive at the same time, and the infrastructure is not big enough to support that we have this congestion. But imagine that wasn't a constraint, and then we could just tell everyone to go to work at a slightly different time. If that was the case, then all the cars would be going at slightly different times, and traffic would flow freely 24 hours a day. Alternatively, you could try increase supply. You could try build more lanes on this highway, but all you're going to end up then is more unutilized capacity outside of those peak periods. And the electricity network is identical. You've got wires and substations and power plants that have a fixed capacity, and you've got a whole bunch of consumers who want to use that network at exactly the same times, the peak times in the mornings and evenings in particular. And what we at Plentify do is we help you use it at different times rather, because not everybody has to be at work in the same time like you do with the road network. As long as you have a hot shower when you want it, you don't care if it's heated at noon today, or at 8 a.m. in the morning, or at 8 p.m. at night. You just want to have a hot shower. And so what we're doing on the electricity network is the equivalent of telling each car to drive at slightly different times. And it means that each of those drivers benefits because they get there much more quickly, or in our context, they get electricity for much cheaper and cleaner. And the network benefits because they no longer have to build this expensive new infrastructure to serve growing demand. They can make the most of what they've already got. So that's like fundamentally what our technology does. The way that we achieve this is we have small bots, IoT devices that plug onto the appliances in your home. In particular, we've got two bots at the moment. We've got Hotbot, which attaches to your geyser, your electric water heater for international listeners, and SolarBot, which attaches to your residential solar inverter. And these devices, they learn your demand patterns. They understand your supply situation, they understand how much solar you got available, they understand the pricing on the grid, and they figure out when to turn your appliances on and off such that you get the service that you want, but you use the cheapest or the least amount of electricity possible. The result of that is that at the end of the month, you haven't experienced any service outages, but your electricity bill has fallen substantially. And we're talking probably 3.5x your service fee if you talk with the geysers alone, and up to 10, 20x your service fee with solar in terms of value created. So there's a huge amount of value on the table there. And then once we have this in your home and we've got all these control points, we can start thinking about how do we aggregate this together to provide broader systems broader services to the system. For example, if you live in an apartment building, what we do is we coordinate across all the apartments to make best use of a communal solar or battery system to help everyone get cheaper, cleaner power. Or if you're on a distribution network, like you serve by a municipality, we can coordinate across the whole city and make sure that we shift the city's consumption to cheaper, cleaner times, ultimately driving a more sustainable system for everyone. So So it starts with the individual home, but it's the aggregation of all of these homes together that ultimately drives impact.
On that latter part, where would you say you are in your scale and in your journey, right? It's like to what extent have you been able to onboard entire, let's say, suburbs, all the way through to like maybe postal codes, municipalities, even. Um, are you still in body corporates? Are you in estates? Like, are you entire kind of complexes, office managers? Like, I just want to get the sense of scale that you're at, and because what you've sold there is a very like compelling vision of how is it that you can, once we get a certain critical mass, we can actually help with energy management for an entire community. And I'm just made me curious around what's your level of scale? How close are you to that goal?
Yeah, I mean, what I can tell you is that we probably have the largest virtual power plant of its kind in the Southern Hemisphere. We are at a pretty meaningful scale already. I remember actually when we started this business several years ago, we talked to some of the leaders in European VPPs back then, and they told us how much they had under management, and it blew our minds. And we now 4x where they were at that point. In terms of how we've accrued those volumes, Kay, do you want to maybe talk to the types of clients we serve?
Yeah, sure. So ultimately, Cameron, what we want to do is be able to get into a home somewhere. Our tech, we're a residential load management platform, so our bots need to be connected to home appliances. And when we think through the channels that you can take to get into a home, there are several, and we've experimented with multiple of them over our time. But the channels where we've had the most success or the most traction have been in the property and the solar channels specifically. So in the property channel, we work with property developers and large property owners. In the solar channel, we work with solar distributors, solar companies, and EPCs. And to give you an example of the types of clients we serve here, in the property segment, we work with Baldwin, which is the largest residential real estate property developer in South Africa. And we have basically embarked on a mass scale rollout across all of their existing portfolio, as well as across all of the developments that they're building into the future. In the solar segment, we work with companies like Harrods. They're one of the largest solar distributors in the country, as well as some of the largest solar as a service companies, for example, utility and EPCs that service that market. And the reason ultimately that we found the best traction through these channels is that we can improve the economics of solar. We can improve the economics of their offering and enable them to offer cheaper and more economical solar to their customers.
Yeah, spot on. While you're talking, I was actually thinking about the different value propositions to different customers. So like direct to user, it's like cool because you get to bring down your electricity bill, and then there's also the kind of identity-based feel-good value proposition of doing something that's a bit cleaner. But like proportionally compared to household expenditures, it's usually quite small. However, if you're looking at property managers, large scale corporates, and solar, I mean, like not large scale, like large scale corporate, but like property owners and like property development companies, as you said. But for them, this is something that, if plugged in, is a direct contribution towards their bottom line. That's something that they're going to be able to see immediately, specifically in the commercial space. And then on the solar space, it's also anyone that's providing, like you said, solar as a service. It's directly required if they want to also manage the grid of their client base. I'm curious about the solar distributor though, if they're going like direct to customer. Is it something that's like a featured add-on that becomes an advantage that do they become just like a kind of distribution channel, and they sell their product as part of the stack that goes into them, and then you manage the service for the solar company or for the user? Like, how does that work?
Sure. So let's talk about distributors. So a distributor would be a B2B2C channel for us. So basically you have solar distributors which sell various components of a solar system, be it the panels, the batteries, the inverter, and they sell that to solar installers who then ultimately sell that to an end user. So we would work with the distributor and essentially offer our product as an add-on to every solar system that they sell to installers. And then those installers will then sell the Plentify-powered solar system to their end users.
Quick one while I have your attention. I want to chat to you about something that I've built specifically just for you as the audience of the podcast, right? As a thank you for being here and for continuously supporting us, I built something called the Founder Roadmap. It's something that I've built off of the 130 so podcast episodes I've done, and having worked with over 150 clients to date, there's a common bunch of patterns that I've seen that lead to where money is being leaked out of a business, where your time and energy is being spent and wasted. And I've consolidated that into an assessment of about 20 questions where you get to see exactly the impact that the areas of strategic focus, execution, cash, people, and your own, how you manage your own energy can really lead to some of the pain points and problems and challenges that you might be facing in the business. But not just around diagnosis, it's also going to give you suggested next moves that have been, battle tested by all the founders that I've worked with and spoken to. So you can build your own success roadmap over the next 90 days to actually work on these issues that have been pointed out. And what's the catch? There is none. It's totally free. There is no email sign up because I'm not trying to build a list, and it's only going to take you about 15 minutes to do from end to end. So if you want to take the insights that you're getting from this podcast, turn that into action, you probably want to click on the link in the description below or go to roadmap.metavolve.co. And you'll be able to complete that roadmap now in 15 minutes and see exactly where you are leaking time, energy, and cash. Cool. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so the business model, guys, do you charge? You've got a price per product, and then do you have a typical subscription model for the software? Is it more simpler or more complicated than that?
Sure. I'm happy to field this, and I'm sure Jon has some points to add here. So at the core of our pricing model is the fact there's a hardware fee for the hardware that's installed for the bots, and there's a monthly service fee thereafter. And that monthly service fee covers the provision of these, the home energy management service that we provide. But depending on where a customer is at, we can be quite flexible around that pricing model. So for example, some of our customers have capital and they prefer to just pay for the hardware and maybe multiple years of service up front, and we'll structure a deal accordingly. Whereas in the other extreme, we might have customers that don't like to pay upfront, and they prefer to just enter into a SaaS arrangement with us. So basically a monthly subscription fee from the outset, and we can do that too. So we really try to meet the customers where they're at in terms of their own business model and flex around those needs.
Okay. And then would it also include maintenance of the actual hardware, servicing of the actual hardware, and then also the software, the analytics, the reporting, customer success, all of that? Is that what you refer to as the service element?
Exactly. Yeah. So the service fee would sort of cover a warranty. That warranty can be somewhere between 3 and 5 years, depending on the product. It would entail the access to the various apps that we provide. So it could be dashboards for the B2B customer, but also user apps for the user. It covers customer support in case anything goes wrong. Folks can contact us through various channels. And particularly in the B2B2C channel, we enable our customers to be able to sell our products. We provide a huge amount of marketing support and collateral to those customers. So all of that's included in the service fees.
Got you. Yeah, because for them, they, especially for the solar distributor, this is something that they're able to put a profit margin on top of it as they sell it to installers. And so obviously helping them out, you got to help them sell the product in every words. Where's your biggest revenue coming from, and which is your most profitable segment? Are they the same? Are they different? How would you segment your market in that way?
The neat thing about our business is that we can serve multiple customer segments simultaneously. And I think we've been quite deliberate about doing that because we wanted to build quite a resilient business and not be dependent on any one channel. I'd say we've had, as I mentioned, the greatest traction through the property and solar channels. I'd say we've had a lot of success in that large property segment. We've probably got about 8,000 units deployed across various apartments and estates around the country. And we're very bullish on that category going forward. Just we're seeing the adoption of centralized solar systems the adoption of solar systems is growing fast in that segment. But then long term, if we look at the individual home segment, we expect in some amount of time, every rooftop in South Africa will have solar on it. So we continue to invest in that channel and build the features necessary to be able to ensure that our product is an inevitable add-on to every solar system that's deployed in the country.
Okay, so it's basically your entire focus of growth is entirely linked to solar. So it's not just around getting the hotpot, getting the geyser management and bringing that cost down. I mean, obviously, if someone finds you and they're like, go for it, right? If you want to buy that, obviously, you're never going to say no. But in terms of who you're being very deliberate towards is really growing with solar, and that goes straight back to Jon, how you started the conversation around the main points of energy utilization, and the best way to maximize solar energy is just actually using it at the right times when the sun is actually on, instead of having to pay for these expensive batteries. So okay, I get a sense of it. However, you did throw me a slight curveball earlier, and now I do really need to understand what the hell a virtual power plant is.
So a virtual power plant is where you have lots of small distributed energy assets. So lots of solar panels on different roofs, different EV chargers all over the place, geysers all over the place, batteries all over the place. And you network them together with software so that you can operate them as one single unit. And so when a utility comes to you and they say, cool, do we build a 500 megawatt coal plant, or can we contract with some aggregator who has aggregated 500 megawatts of these small loads together and give you one interface, one control, so it acts like a single power plant? I can see the confusion on your face. I'm guessing you're wondering.
No, this is my concentration phase, not my confusion phase, because now I'm extrapolating like what the consequences of this are, and I've got follow-up questions. So please keep going. I'm just for the people only listening to this. The reason why Jon paused is because I was just like, I'm now leaning forward in my chair.
Yeah. So these virtual power plants. The question might come up like, why would a utility even consider this? Like, surely, like generating kilowatt hours from a coal plant is much better from them because they actually have the supply then that they can sell. And the truth is that they should be ambivalent between the two. As long as it has the same impact on the system, they should be agnostic between those two choices. And so if you thought about, say that the utility was short of 500 megawatts of power in one moment of time, sure, they could spin up 500 megawatts of additional generation from a coal plant, or they could tell 500 megawatts of geysers to turn off. And that'll bring the system into balance in exactly the same way. And so that has the same value to the utility. And it's that concept of trying to figure out how you aggregate with software all these distributed assets that forms virtual power plants that ultimately has a lot of value for utilities. And this is something that's growing pretty rapidly in markets around the world.
Cool. You're gonna have to forgive me now. I'm gonna want to simplify this because there's a couple elements of industry jargon embedded in there. So my basic understanding of a virtual power plant is, to your point, because you've got this distributed grid of assets. So you've got these controllers on geysers, which are essentially drawing power. They're obviously not providing or storing. But with solar, you've got the system of how that power is being distributed from the actual solar panels itself into the inverter, into the actual power supply. But you're able to redirect this as you will, but very intelligently at scale, because let's say there's 100 of these at any point in time. And so whether it's and this is where you have to correct me. So whether it's the battery systems or actually just the direct utilization of solar, it means as long as the users are prioritized and they're able to draw power to meet their needs, if there is certain surplus power at certain times, you're able to put that back into the grid or into the anyone else's demand for power at that point, to reduce, as you were saying earlier, the massive dependence on the supply from the like actual proper coal and diesel powered power plants. So my understanding is that as long as there's if I was a property developer and property manager, you're coming to me and saying, cool, not only we're going to reduce your cost base by making sure that we're going to install this along with your entire solar grid so that you are spending less on electricity on top of what you were going to spend less on anyway by installing solar. Now we're going to bring that down even further so you can get your ROI way sooner in terms of the capex that you put out for that. On top of that, whenever there's excess power, instead of just sitting there and switching off what's coming from the solar panels into your batteries and inverters, we're actually really be able to distribute that into the grid. And and actually sell that power so that you can get your return on investment even sooner. And then once that entire grid is paid off, you can actually turn something that was an expense into potentially a profit arm for the business. How do on a scale of 1 to 10, how correct am I?
That was a really good explanation. I put you at a 9, and I'll mark you down just because there are additional things that a BPP can do that we haven't even touched on yet. So you're completely correct that take a apartment building. You described the value created really well there, which is that by installing a load management system, you control when electricity is used within that apartment building. You can use that ability to do a couple of things, or a bunch of things, but two of the things that have the most value are shift consumption to the middle of the day and shape that consumption to match the output of a solar plant. That way you can install more solar, and solar is much cheaper than the grid, and therefore you can bring down your average cost of electricity. The second thing you can do is that when there's an outage, which obviously is less prevalent now than it was 18 months ago, but when there's an outage, you can simply turn off all those geysers or those sources of demand. And so that battery now only has to provide enough backup supply for everything besides geysers. And so you can install a battery that is 60% smaller and still provide the same level of service to your residents. And this combination of bigger solar systems and therefore more revenue from more solar sales and lower capex through a smaller battery significantly improves the ROI on these solar and battery plants. And I mentioned I only give you 9 out of 10 because VPPs do more than just what we've described. And that's because VPPs can move in both directions. Obviously, in a South African context, we've got the mindset of we are supply constrained. We just want to turn things off, turn demand off to keep the grid in balance. But the direction the world is moving, particularly with the penetration of renewables increasing, it means that we're increasingly going to be facing the opposite problem, where we have too much supply in certain moments of the day. And we've seen this in many markets around the world, where Texas, for example, on crazy windy days, they actually pay you to use electricity from the grid because they've got nowhere to put it. And the benefit of a VPP is that when those moments happen, you can very quickly and effectively absorb all that excess power and actually get paid in those cases to heat your geyser. Obviously, we're not there yet in South Africa, but it's an inevitability of the energy transition.
Sure. I mean, that goes full circle back to your points of really explaining that analogy of the road network and the capacity of that. It makes perfect sense. Damn. Okay, well, I'm glad that I'm able to wrap my head around this now because, for something that on face value is 2 devices and an app is, yeah, love technology. Hey, what you guys have been able to create as a business is insane. But now I definitely need to know the founding story because I don't think just 2 guys in the solar world could probably come up with something like this. There's clearly a lot of industry and domain specific knowledge that's backing this up. So guys, I mean, I'm not exactly asking for your CVs, but I'm just asking for how did you meet? How did this idea come about? What's the founding story?
So Kailas and I have known each other for a very long time. Kailas was actually my mentor in my very first job out of university. I was really fortunate to be placed on his team. And that was over 20 years ago now. And is it over 20 years? It's 20 years this year. Yeah. It's been a long time that we've known each other. After we worked together for a couple of years at McKinsey, we went our separate ways and pursued our own professional paths. We've always stayed in touch. On my own professional path, I got weirdly interested in geysers. I think I wrote my first business plan to do with optimizing geysers back in 2007 when I was working in carbon finance and I was trying to figure out a way to finance effectively smart geysers with carbon credits. And I went to business school after that. I wrote more business plans about geysers, went to Google and did a whole bunch of stuff there on leading their energy business in Africa, but still obsessed with geysers and ultimately left Google to start this business, starting with geysers. But ultimately, what's really drawn me to geysers is the fact that it is both an incredible destructive force in our grid, but also the most amazing opportunity to turn the system around. So they are destructive because they consume about 40 to 60% of the electricity in your home. It's the single biggest consumer of electricity in your home. And what's more, the way that they're controlled is with a mechanical thermostat. which is a device invented more than 150 years ago. And it was novel back then, but it's certainly not novel now. And what this thermostat does is it causes you to use that 40 to 60% of your electricity at literally the worst possible times for the grid. It concentrates your heating in the morning and evening peak periods to the most part. And so we are probably about 25, 30% of our entire country's demand during peak times is just geysers in people's homes. This is the dirtiest, expensive time to generate electricity, and pretty much none of those geysers need to be on it during those times. On the other hand, geysers they're batteries. It's a thermal energy store in a tank. And you pump more heat in there and it stores that energy as heat. And you can use that heat later. You can have a hot shower in 5 hours time, 12 hours time, a day's time. And so what that means is that you've basically got the cheapest battery you can imagine in your home already in the form of your geyser. And if you've now combined that with the cheapest form of energy generation, which is solar, you've got an amazing combination of super cheap generation and super cheap storage, much cheaper than batteries. And it was kind of this concept that had been ruminating on for a while. And ultimately, the piece that triggered the move was seeing what was happening in the rest of the market. As I mentioned, immediately for Plentify, I was working for Google, running the African energy business. And the work that we were focusing on was very, very reflective of what was happening in the industry at that point in time. And it was most clean energy activity in Africa was in two areas. It was getting giant projects onto the grid to get clean megawatts onto the grid. And it was getting tiny off-grid systems into people's hands so they could get electrified for the first time. But pretty much nothing was being done for the majority of Africa's population that is already connected to a grid system, but is suffering the world's most expensive and unreliable power. And it was a combination of this massive unmet problem in the market, together with these innovations in technology that were enabling this new way of optimizing distributed assets that kind of ultimately got me really excited about the sector. But I couldn't have, I'm just a geek who loves energy. I need someone who can actually sell it as well. And thankfully, Kailas was around and helps with that.
So, I mean, as Jon mentioned, I've known him for a very long time. I started out my career in consulting, and then after that, I joined Discovery. And it was there that I guess I got my first exposure to entrepreneurship, because I got to work alongside two founders there, being both Adrian and Barry. And the second half of my Discovery stint, I was there for 7 years in total, I spent in New York heading up their Vitality InsurTech business. And it was a really interesting job. I learned a lot. But I got to a certain point in 2019 where I found myself asking, well, what's next? And it was an interesting moment, because I started to think about, well, I've been working for about 15 years. And when you just start of your career, when you think about having 15 years of experience under your belt, it just seems like this foreign concept, right? You see job adverts where they advertise for people with 15 years experience, and you're like, well, who are those people? And all of a sudden, I was that person. And I then started, for some reason, thinking about, well, is what I'm doing still going to make me relevant in 20 or 30 years time? And I had all these existential questions going on in my head at that point. And I then had a serendipitous, I guess, in hindsight, coffee chat with Jon, where he told me what he was doing, told me he was about to leave, or had left Google and returning to South Africa to start this energy business. And it probably was the timing of that conversation that, because it coincided with my own soul searching at that point, that the idea of starting a business from the ground up, using first principles, seemed like the right next thing for me to do. And it's a sign of how persuasive Jon is. I walked into my boss's office the very next day and handed in my resignation, or told him that I was going to resign. And 6 months later, I packed up my life in New York, and I was on a plane to Cape Town. In hindsight, it was a very dumb decision. I did virtually no diligence on the product or the industry, but something about it just felt right. I guess Firstly, because I've known Jon for a long time, and somebody that I trust very deeply. And when you're leaping into the unknown, you want to do it with people that you can that are going to be in your corner. And it certainly proved to be, although it was a dumb decision, I think ultimately it turned out to be the right one. I've learned an incredible amount in a sector that I've subsequently fallen in love with, and I find the problem incredibly riveting. Trying to think about how to shape demand in ways that allow the energy system to adapt in the ways that it should. So I'd say my route to Plentify was not because I was a geyser geek, unlike Jon, but more a leap into startup land and wanting to work on interesting problems with cool people.
Well, there's one little diamond of truth. I was going to say, Graham, a diamond of truth in there is that I find that the intuition of entrepreneurs is extremely powerful. And for me, there's no coincidence that, at this point when you're questioning what the next path is and tempted by entrepreneurship, you made a decision based on intuition instead of due to like significant diligence and well thought through. So makes perfect sense in this new identity chapter that you're on. And well done for doing it, man. So I guess also explains why you guys are keen to do podcasts, because it's like you're just converting the world into understanding what this new opportunity is. But really, I'm pretty converted so far. I mean, solar was the obvious one, but I'd really underestimated the geyser impact here and just how much of a difference that's making. So, yeah, I want to know what your guys' vision is. I mean, we'll go chronologically back through the story and we'll talk about your scaling journey, but I just really want to know what's your vision for this, because this is I don't maybe if I'm not too out there, but this is a change the world kind of thing.
And we hope so. I mean, that's why we started this, is that we want to have an impact. We're a mission-driven company. We exist to enable utilities to deliver affordable, reliable, and clean electricity. And so when we think about our vision, we frame our vision in terms of the impact that we want to leave. And there's two areas where we are deeply passionate, where we want to have impact. The one is South Africa, and the other is climate change. Within South Africa, we've got a unique set of problems. Obviously, climate change is one of them that applies to everyone. But on top of that, we've got all the problems that come with a weak grid, as we've experienced over the last couple of decades. And so what's quite cool about our technology is that in addition to delivering cheaper services to people, enabling better ROI solar plants, it also fixes the grid for everyone. I mean, think about if most geysers are on during peak times. Peak times are where Eskom is throttling their diesel peakers as much as possible just to keep the lights on. That is when we are most susceptible to blackouts or to load shedding. And so if you can shift demand away from those times, sure, you can benefit the individual consumer by driving efficiency, but add that all together and you can have a significant impact on the need for load shedding in the first place. In fact, we did a project called Project Smart Geyser in partnership with City of Cape Town, Hessequa Municipality. It was verified by UCT and sponsored by the GIZ and EEP Africa. And in that project, we found that by rolling out hotbots, just the geyser technology, not even the solar technology, hotbots to 25% of households, we would eliminate 20 hours per month of morning and evening blackouts for everyone in the country. And that kind of speaks to the path to impact as well, that by focusing on those biggest consumers, we can have outsized impact on the rest of the system. So our goal in South Africa, with that in mind, is to be responsible for mitigating an entire entire stage of load shedding within the next 5 years or so. Globally, the goal is more around climate change, where we want to have a material impact on enabling more solar, because that will mitigate carbon emissions. And we're talking gigawatts of solar that we want to enable globally.
Guys, I'm so sold. I just want to see you achieve everything as quickly as possible. What's your biggest constraint to achieving that impact in South Africa?
I can take this one. I mean, to a large extent, our destiny is in our own hands, right? We've got a great team, a great product, and I think it's up to us to execute against this massive opportunity and capture our rightful place in there. But there are obviously real world constraints to deal with. So for one, building hardware tech means long development cycles and can be capital intensive. So we're fortunate there to have had investors that have backed us on our journey. They believed in the vision, and they've shown enough conviction to invest in us multiple times throughout our journey. Talent is, talent plus capital equals output, I guess. Talent plus capital plus execution equals output. And what we're building is quite unique and novel, and you need to have top tier folks believe in you and join you along for the ride. And again, we've got an incredible team of folks at Plentify, some of whom joined when we were way smaller than we are now. And it was certainly a leap of faith for them. But even the ones that have joined more recently, we're grateful for the conviction they showed and the contribution that they made. But I think continuing to find great talent is going to be critical to our future success. And then recognizing that the market is definitely not static. We are experiencing a transformation in the energy industry in South Africa, probably a generational change, a once in a generation change. And so as that market shifts and changes, as Eskom unbundles, as more renewable energy comes online, business models will change, competitors will emerge, and it will be important for Plentify to be agile and carve out our own rightful spots in this new ecosystem. And that's going to be something that's going to be critical for us for our long-term sustainable growth in SA.
Is that what keeps you up at night at the moment?
Oh, well, I've got a 2.5-year-old son who keeps me up at night. But yeah, certainly some of those topics, yes, they can crop up at weird times of the day and night.
Cool. Guys, thank you for the indulgence in my big picture philosophical pattern meshing. Love this at the kind of holistic level of understanding the product, the business model, markets, sort of vision. Let's go back into the chronological part of the story. You've spoken about when it is that you met each other, like Kailas, you served out your notice, flew down to Cape Town. I mean, spoiler alert to the audience, just you're back in New York. So, but just talk to me about that first point of when you registered the company. Did you need capital for like developing the R&D of both products and the software at the same time? What did that MVP look like? How did you actually start and get to a point of validation and then revenue generation?
Obviously, when we started the company, we had an idea in mind of the product we wanted to build. It wasn't like we started on day one from like conceptualizing what it would be. But the product we wanted to go to market with is different from the product we are in market with today. That product was called Solar Pays. What we were doing is we were upgrading homes from electric to solar water heating, paying for the cost of the upgrade, but getting our return through a share of the electricity savings that the solar water heater generated. And that was actually a great business. We were converting customers with one phone call 15% of the time. To this day, we still haven't had a default. People love the product. It works for them, no complaints, all that kind of stuff. The problem came with day zero in Cape Town. So for those not familiar, we came extremely close to running out of water in Cape Town. And the city mobilized its people to try and stave off this impending disaster. And so what happened over the course of about 2-3 months, our users' hot water consumption, which were pretty much all in Cape Town at that point, our users' hot water consumption dropped 60%. And because we were essentially selling hot water as a service, our revenue dropped 60% as well. And this all happened at the exact moment we were about to go out and raise external capital for the first time. And our only thing we had to show for ourselves was, yeah, we got a cool idea that doesn't work in drought environments. And to be honest, like, we're a company that believes that climate change is a thing, that are going to go out there and actively fight climate change. So we're going to be exposed to drought environments at the time. So it did not feel like a good future fit for us. And it was around then that we started thinking about how else could we achieve this long-term impact that we're trying to have on the grid, and realized that the problem was less about changing the source of energy. It was more about changing the timing of energy use. because the sources are there already. They're just not being used because you're using your electricity at the wrong time. And what we'd already built to manage and monitor these solar geysers was exactly the foundation we needed to start building this load management system. And that was the genesis of Hotbot and SolarBot. So with that context, to kind of go back to the fundraising journey, when we started out, we had this idea. We bootstrapped for the first 3 years, as well as managed to raise a handful of grants, which were absolutely critical. We got grants in our early years from Echoing Green. It's an amazing organization. I'd highly recommend it to any of your listeners if they're in the social entrepreneurship space. And the Tamer Fund for Social Ventures out of Columbia University, and the African Entrepreneurship Awards. And those 3 grants enabled us to operate for about 3 years, after which point we started raising commercial capital, and we've raised about 4 rounds of capital since then.
Looking back, I think there's some milestones that come to mind. I mean, Jon was out there soldiering on his own for a couple of years, working on this idea. So he registered the company in 2017. I joined in 2019. At that point, we had about 4 employees working out of a little Matchbox office at Woodstock Exchange. I still remember walking into work. This is now, I've gotten off the plane from New York and walked into this office on my very first day, and I saw 4 people holed up in a little room without any windows, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done?
It was so small, like people had to stand up and leave out their chair so the other person could walk past to get from their desk, out of the office. It was like
Just one level above garage.
pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. So that was 2019. 2020, obviously, the world went into complete lockdown. And interestingly enough, I sort of think through that period as being one of the most pivotal in sort of Plentify's lifetime. It was when we first closed our first commercial round, funding round. We closed, or we secured one of our largest customers to date during that period as well. And we, I think, really got to grips with what our product and our business model was during those days, and when we were all sort of locked up at home. And then sort of between 2021 and 2024, I think we saw this compound effect of all of the efforts that had gone in starting to pay off. We signed on more customers initially in the property sector, but then as the solar boom took off, we understood how our product could really accelerate the solar adoption. We started to focus heavily there, and more customers came on board.
One thing that's obviously caught my attention, and the reason why I love entrepreneurship, is because part of your story is one crisis caused a pivot, and then another crisis caused scale, really, right? And so, especially if you're looking at during COVID, but like we had almost 2 crises simultaneous. Besides COVID, then we had like extreme load shedding, and so with that, the massive change in the solar industry just would have totally unlocked scale for you. And obviously, super exciting, Kailas, that you point out, it's just gone from strength to strength and kind of compounded from there. I'd love to think that, actually, not love to think, I'd love to see the data. If you can show the impact on how load shedding has gone down over time and the extent that you can attribute Plentify to that impact. Do you have that data? That would be really cool.
I wish we were at that scale where you could see a meaningful impact. Unfortunately, we're not at that scale yet.
I was hopeful with the City of Cape Town project there's something of that kind of research that you had in that impact, but at this point it just kind of feels inevitable.
Within like the particular like residential estates, absolutely. I mean, maybe it's worth talking about load shedding exemptions, for example, we've managed to secure.
Yeah, we're definitely helping keep the lights on at a more micro level. So a good example of this is our work with Baldwin. So 2 of the estates, the ones in the Western Cape, participate in something called the load curtailment program. And this is essentially an arrangement between that Baldwin estate and the local utility, whether it be the City of Cape Town or Eskom, where during times where the grid is under strain or where there's load shedding, if Baldwin can reduce demand during those times themselves, then that estate is exempt from load shedding. And the reason that reason that arrangement exists is because on specific nodes of the network, the Baldwin estate is the largest consumer of that network, of energy on that network. So they can make a meaningful difference to reducing congestion on that particular node. And I'm happy to say the Plentify solution is helping them do this. So what we do is when these periods happen, we get a signal to turn off geysers, and we can do that without the user ever noticing. They experience no hot water outages, and thereby bringing the overall energy demand of that estate down, which means that the lights are kept on for everybody else. And that's the microcosm of what we could do at scale. And once we roll this out across, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of homes in South Africa, I think we can adjust demand during times that the grid is under strain with no noticeable difference to the end user, but helping to keep the lights on for the entire country.
Kailas, I'm already sold, man. Like you don't have to keep just driving the point home. No, I jest. No, this is epic, guys. So yeah, a couple of things that I wanted to unpack and get into was really understanding that original B2B, B2C model. Wasn't even aware of that entire shift in business model. Surprise, surprise, the startup land, right? Everyone needs to pivot. But really cool about how that evolved and the reasoning why for it as well. Yeah, I just want to then talk actually the practicality of the shift to the new business model, because and we haven't even spoken about the complexity of hardware manufacturing and all of that. So yeah, I mean, you were very much solar. Then obviously there was the hotbot geyser side of things, and then the software. That's a lot of money, right? And even just on the R&D side of things, and then also again from an OpEx perspective, just to constantly develop these units. I guess just talk to me through the early stages there, your first round of commercial investments, and how you really, talk me through the practical details of the manufacturing, the software development, all of that, and how you got that through. I imagine that was a pretty intense period of your lives.
Yeah, it's true. So you're completely correct. We've got a technically complex product that is expensive to make. It's technically complex because it's a full stack product that involves software engineering, it involves hardware engineering, it involves embedded systems development on that hardware, and it involves a bunch of data science. And all these different technical pieces need to work together seamlessly to deliver the services to our users. Within that, I must say this was I've worked in technology in previous roles, but this is the first time I've been responsible for a company or for a team developing hardware. And it's a different set of challenges that I certainly underestimated myself when we got into this. And it's more expensive, it takes longer, and if you make a mistake, the cost of those mistakes are much greater because these devices are then out of the field. So, I mean, I think there's been a bunch of lessons that we've learned as an organization and a bunch of expertise that we've brought into the team to make us more proficient at this. But you're right, ultimately, this also came down to finding enough funding to support us through this journey. In our first round, I think we went to start raising in 2019. Back then, the combination of Africa, energy, and hardware were three dirty words for investors. And finding an investor who was interested in one of them was a challenge, let alone finding an investor interested in all three. And for foreign investors, there was a reticence around Africa, unless they had a mandate specifically for it. Energy is such a deeply technical field that unless an investor was familiar with it and had spent time in it, they often were just too intimidated by the technicalities. And then hardware, it's not the quick software returns that VCs know and love. And so it's, again, a subset of investors that were interested in that. We're fortunate in our first round to secure funding from effectively a family office, a South African family office, who've subsequently invested in every one of our rounds. So they've been an amazing partner to us.
Can you share which one?
The family's name are the Cooks. Yeah, they've been an amazing set of investors. And then in our second round, we started to pull in more institutional investors. So right now, after several rounds of funding, we about 50% funded from international investors and 50% from South African investors. On the South African side, we've got a mixture of family offices like the Cooks, as well as institutional investors like Fireball Capital and Simple Capital. And then internationally, we've done really well to secure some leading early stage venture investors from the US. We've got Third Sphere, we've got Telus Global Ventures, we've got Susquehanna Investment Group, as well as major African investors like E3 Capital. And in this new round that we're about to close, there's a couple of new names we're excited to announce as well.
Yeah, really, really awesome, guys. And also for the record, congrats on the fact that you're about to close your next round. So you also mentioned 3 words almost back to back that are a podcaster's like keyword trap cards. And you said challenges, mistakes, lessons, like pretty much in that order with like space between 14 words. So I really want to get into the practicalities of that and get to some of these meaty examples. But there's one that we discussed offline that like the first mistake that we need to talk about on the topic of fundraising and having international investors. You said early on that someone gave you the advice to domicile in SA, and that was not a great decision, to kind of put it lightly. Talk me through that.
Yeah, and in retrospect, probably one of the worst mistakes that we made, or missteps, or poor decisions, however you want to put it. Yeah, so in the earliest days, we'd obviously we're thinking about we were imagining how gigantic this business was going to grow, as every new entrepreneur does, and we're trying to think about how to structure this for the long term. And the one thing that was obviously top of mind for us is whether South Africa was the best jurisdiction to host this business, particularly since we have global ambitions. This is not, we do have South African ambitions and we want to have deep impact here, but this, there's a bigger story that we're trying to tell. So we went and visited a prominent lawyer in Cape Town and said, cool, we want to set up this new entity in whatever market it was. I can't even remember what the flavor of the day was back then. And their advice to us was, no, don't do it. Just set yourselves up in South Africa, spend your limited resources on proving that you actually have a viable business. And then once you have a viable business, it'll be very easy just to re-domicile at that point in time. So I agree with all of that. Like those, up until the last point, yes, like you got to believe that you have a viable business. Yes, you have limited resources and you got to be really careful about where you invest those. But no, it is not easy to re-domicile later in time. You are severely constrained in terms of the options available to you, with the better options being way, way, way more expensive to implement. In fact, prohibitively expensive to implement. And so now we're going through this exercise at the moment, and it's, I wish that we had just done this in the beginning. It would have made our lives a lot simpler, I think. Although who knows, maybe it's the grass is green on the other side as well.
Oh, I mean, could you mind just like giving some more detail? Because I mean, obviously, there's I've seen so many masterclasses in some of the founder and entrepreneur communities in SA at the moment talking about offshoring. It's a pretty frequent topic, especially in South African business. Like, if you want to get international investors on board, it's very difficult to do so when you domiciled in SA. So just like talk me through, like, aggravate the pain for the listeners. It's like, that's why you should do it early if you're ambitious and you back yourself, because like what is the pain that you guys are going through, but also how are you solving it?
Okay, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. I think that it really is just that the bigger you grow, the bigger you become, the harder it is, and the more expensive it is, and the more time consuming it becomes. So
Why?
for example, firstly, regulations have shifted in South Africa multiple times around how you can offshore. So without getting into the complexities of this, there are different structures. There's a loop structure or a holdco structure where you have an offshore entity, that's the holding company that owns 100% of the South African entity. That would be the preferred structure, but the South African Reserve Bank has shifted its position on whether that's an allowable structure or not over time. So the alternative is something called a mirror, where you have a offshore entity and a South African entity, and they have that identical shareholding, so i.e. they're mirror entities of each other. That structure is allowable, but it looks complex to investors who are not, particularly foreign investors, who are not familiar with that structure. So to Jon's point, if you're a foreign investor and you're making a decision around Africa and energy and hardware, and you're trying to get comfortable with all of these worlds, then this is an additional thing that they now need to get comfortable with, and it adds to the complexity of closing that type of fundraise. Offshoring IP is not an easy task. You have to have uh, key product decisions made in that offshore jurisdiction, which means you have to have key product people in those jurisdictions as well. So, if you currently do all of your IP development in South Africa and you want to move it offshore, then it's a process to get that right. And then you have to obviously demonstrate that this offshore entity is a place of effective management, which means you need to have key management decisions made there. So board meetings need to be held there, and so on and so forth. And this individually, all of these things might sound trivial and manageable, but it adds a layer of overhead and governance to what is already a complex business when you're trying to launch and scale a startup. But Cameron, I'd like to I can sort of, when I think about the YouTube thumbnail that's going to go onto the image of this podcast, I can imagine it saying, Plentify founders say the worst mistake they ever made was to domicile in South Africa. And I want to make it clear that that's not coming from an unpatriotic perspective at all. I think it's important to underscore that what we're talking about here is where you domicile a headquarters, right? And that's one decision. And certainly, I think had we did this in another market, it might have been easier to raise international capital, and be better for our ability to scale globally. However, I think it was the best possible decision that we made to make South Africa our first market. And I think it might sound counterintuitive, but looking back, there was a market that had a real need. There was a energy crisis underway, and our product was well suited to solving that problem or helping to solve that problem. Secondly, there is great talent in South Africa. We've managed to hire some phenomenal engineers and growth specialists and operators in South Africa at a fraction of the costs of what it would hire hire the same individuals in New York or San Francisco, where Jon and I were based for several years. And then thirdly, it's, when you're starting a business from the ground up, you have to rely on the kindness of friends and strangers. And fortunately, Jon and I have deep personal and professional relationships in South Africa, and we were able to lean on them in the early stages of our business. And then lastly, as we think about globalizing, what's quite unique about South Africa, it's well positioned from a time zone perspective. So you have decent amounts of overlap with the West, as well as the East, as well as Europe. And so while South Africa might not be geographically well situated in terms of serving the rest of the world, it is very, very well situated in terms of being able to service the rest of the world and grow into the rest of the world, especially in a remote first environment. So I wouldn't change anything in terms of South Africa being our first market.
If I can add not to diminish South Africa being the best first market for us, completely agree. Maybe just one practical example of how not domiciling in a foreign market up front led to basically more cost. So if you do this from day zero, you set up a foreign entity, that foreign entity then owns a South African subsidiary, you're sorted. You obviously need to get Reserve Bank approval on that, but it is possible to do so. If we wanted to pull off that same structure at this point in time, we would have to sell Plentify South Africa to a foreign entity. That would mean that all the shareholders in Plentify at the moment would pay tax, capital gains tax, on that sale to the foreign entity. And who on earth is going to be able to fit that bill after creating value for the last 8.5 years? And so now the only way we can redomicile is with mirroring, as opposed to the loop, which is a simpler structure that is more attractive for international investors. And mirroring will take several years to implement properly, because it's a slow process of slowly building up your IP in another market. So I think It would have been a lot cheaper had we done it on day one, and it would have opened up access to more capital for us.
Yeah, cool. Definitely a nugget for people to be aware of there if you've got global ambitions. Holdco overseas first. And also probably get good lawyers that are also entrepreneurial in their thinking and have got some kind of risk appetite, which might be ironic for lawyers. But anyway, that's a rabbit hole. I want to keep going back into the complexities of hardware, right? Some of and just the inherent nature of the business model. It's like it's managed system, like, as you said, very technically complex as well. What are some of these like big challenges and lessons and mistakes that you've had in your journey? And I think also just one thing to add as a layer of my curiosity is like, do you own your own manufacturing? Do you outsource it? Do you own your own software development? Do you outsource it?
So on the development side, we do all design development in-house. That's across software, hardware, firmware, and data science. On the manufacturing side, we use a contract manufacturer in Cape Town. Actually, we use several contract manufacturers. So we handle procurement. We procure the parts from all over the world, bring them into South Africa, and then manufacture them locally through a partner. In terms of the challenges of developing hardware, I'd say that there's things that we did really well, and we continue to do, and there's stuff that certainly we've made mistakes that we've iterated along the way. On the things we've done really well, I think one of the things we did extremely well up front was building multi-purpose hardware. We often like to call Hotbot the Swiss Army knife of geyser controllers because they can do so many different things. And you may not think that there are that many things you can do to a geyser besides turning it on and off, but trust me, there's a ton of services that can be provided. And the reason why that was powerful was that early on in the market, like we had an inkling of what the market opportunity was going to be. We'd obviously spoken to prospective customers, but you don't really know for sure until you go out there and you start selling. And so if we had built something that was completely fit for purpose for the application that we identified up front, 6 months later would have been obsolete because the market would have evolved, the opportunities would have evolved, and this thing would no longer have worked. And so having really powerful, flexible hardware has become part of our DNA, and we've done that with SolarVault as well, and we think it's really important.
Explain to me how hardware can be flexible.
It ultimately comes down to inputs and outputs. So you could just put the inputs and outputs on there that you need to serve the application that you have in mind, or you could add a whole bunch of additional inputs that are going unused. For example, new wired interfaces to plug different things into the hardware, or wireless interfaces to talk to it wirelessly. And then you could also have more outputs to control or actuate different sensors, or actually sensors would be inputs, different motors or valves, etc. And so, I mean, that adds a ton of complexity in the development process to ensure you can do that, but it also adds a lot more power to the device in the long term.
How do you manage that? How do you guys manage the decision making internally around your product developments, like what you're going to go live with, what you're going to change at any point in time? Yeah, because there's so many moving pieces. There's so much that, although again, like, this is why I love you guys as a business. That's the first words, first time the words "I love you" have come on the podcast. The reason why I love your business is because of the fact that like it funnels super nicely. Like, it's simple at face value, and then as you go down, there's so much more complexity, but there's so many different like options and things that you can do. And especially as people that are very technically knowledgeable about this, very committed to impact, can see the scalability, opportunities to like look at going overseas as well. How do you decide? How do you prioritize?
It's a great question. I definitely think Kailas needs to answer this one too. I'll say like there's different levels of decisions that we need to make. There's like improvements, and then there's new strategic investment areas. For improvements, it's simpler because we build channels to basically get feedback from our stakeholders. For example, our customer support team, every month they sit down with the product and the growth team, and they give us a summary of all the support issues that have come through in the last month. And we use that to inform our road mapping to focus on the most important things. Kailas and his team are constantly talking to customers and engaging with them, both existing and new customers, and come back to the product team and say, hey guys, like the market is asking for this. And we think that we can unlock all these opportunities if we do this. And then we proactively go out there and we conduct research as well. So we have a user research team who goes out and does specific research, as well as broader research we do on product market fit for all of our products, which gives us feedback around what people love about our products and where they would like them to improve. And so the improvements, I feel like we're consistently building basically a pipeline of feedback from the market, which then gets filtered into the product. For the strategic investment areas, that's more a combination of what the market is telling us and where we believe the market's going to go. Okay, do you want to take a crack?
Sure. I mean, I think I'm not sure if I'm going to directly answer that question, but hopefully I'll get there. You asked about how we make decisions, and I just want to, if I reflect back on how our decision making process as an organization has evolved since inception, it's actually changed quite a lot, I'd say. So in the early days, I still remember these days fondly. We had these daily stand-ups, and basically the entire company participated in them because there was 4 of us, and so you knew everything that was going on, any function in the business, every single day, and so decision making was super simple. As we started growing, we then brought on more C-suite leaders. So we added a COO, and we had met as a leadership team every week, discussed the profound and the mundane, depending on what was the topic that needed to be discussed, and we made decisions that way. But fast forward to today, we've got an organization of about 50 people, and about 12 or 13 folks that are in leadership positions, and it's important to, one, include them in the decision making. One, because just generally more IQ points around the table leads to greater, richer discussions and better outcomes. But also in order to build buy-in for the direction and the way forward. So we now have these multi-week strategy planning processes at the start of the year, and then at periodic points throughout the year. And it's really, I'd say, an inclusive decision-making process. We try and involve everybody, and as well as the input that we're getting from the market. And but ultimately, I think there's a need for the leadership team to make some of those tougher calls around which product to focus on and which market to focus on. But hopefully through the discussions, we've kind of brought people along for the ride.
I want to kind of tie the loop on the whole fundraising story, right? I mean, obviously being in climate tech, the VC world changed radically. I mean, there's the number of VCs that are actually completely changing their entire business model at the moment. It's a very fascinating space. But obviously it's been a wild ride for you guys after the boom of the VC market 2021. Yeah, what's that kind of been like? And especially now that you're in a phase of re-domiciling and raising funds at the same time, sure, it's a bit of a very financially and legally complicated journey.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, it's interesting that you talk about the boom of VC in 2021 and where it is now, because obviously, yeah, we've ridden that cycle. And what's really interesting, though, that is that 2021 we were raising, it was, I think, probably the worst year of my life. And despite the fact that the market was hot, like money was super cheap at the interest rate level, and so investors were willing to invest, what we were doing at that point was largely setting a dream of what we thought we could achieve and convincing people to adopt that dream, even in a super flush fundraising market, was still really, really difficult, particularly to pull the international capital that we ultimately managed to secure. Fast forward to 2024 in late 23, early 24, and it was probably the worst back then the worst fundraising market since the dot-com bust. It's probably gotten slightly worse since then. But despite that, it was the easiest process of fundraising that I've ever experienced. And the difference was that instead of selling a dream, we were actually selling traction. We had demonstrated that, yes, we said we're going to do the thing, and we went out and we did it, and there's a viable business here. And so that was actually pretty enlightening. That, hey, it turns out investors actually want a viable business, not just a dream. And that's
Who would have thought?
Yeah, who would have thought? That said, going into 2025 and raising this year has been more difficult. The market certainly has declined, but luckily we come off a strong base. We grew our revenue 9x and our deployments 8x last year. And that makes us the best performing company in many of our investors' portfolios, hence why most of our investors are following on, and we're managing to attract more. But it hasn't been easy. Thankfully, we're decoupling the redomicile and the raise slightly. So we're going to close the raise and then we'll do the redomicile after. But it's just, the lawyers are loving it though. Lots of work for them to do.
I'm sure they are. This isn't in order or following on from one another, but going back to the kind of geographical distribution. I mean, Kailas, you were in South Africa, you're back in New York. We haven't really spoken about that. How do you guys handle that? Like growing in a market of South Africa, you being here temporarily, back to the States. Yeah, what's it like having a distributed co-founder relationship in two different, significantly different time zones?
I can talk to this. So, I mean, even before Plentify, while I was working for Vitality, I was working for a South African company while being based in the US. So, working these time zones is something that's unfortunately is all too familiar for me. It just means slightly earlier mornings than most people, and a frantic sprint to get through as many meetings as I can while I still overlap with South Africa, followed by this lull as South Africans go home. And then I can turn to getting some work done. But I say it's made little to no difference in terms of how much Jon and I have been able to interact. We speak several times a week, in fact, sometimes several times a day. I love to tell the story because I think it's sort of indicative. My son is now starting to learn how to talk, and he's at the age where he imitates what his parents do, and he's got this toy phone, and he picks up this toy phone and he goes, "Hey, Jon," because he's heard me say that so many times, picking up a phone before. So that's just, and I think, honestly, I think both our wives think we speak more to each other than to them.
I think there's probably evidence for that.
Yeah. But luckily they're both very supportive.
Yeah, also, I think about being in different countries and time zones is a challenge, but it's also, I think, especially when you're kind of leading the customer facing sales growth part of the business, there's a useful element of being able to forced to squeeze in so many meetings, and then it's like, oh, now I've got deep work time. So it actually kind of there's a benefit towards one's time management there.
Totally. And we can hand off things to each other and keep working, keep the ball rolling 24/7 between us.
Yeah. On the past, right? On the business, the complexities, your own supply chain and value chain, your customers, your growth, your domiciling, fundraising, anything looking backwards that you think is worth sharing with the audience that we haven't really gotten into?
Well, I'll add one, and then I'm sure Jon has other observations. I'd say a company definitely goes through various phases, and we touched on it a little while ago. That when you're small, communication and culture works very differently to when you get much bigger. And I certainly see a couple of inflection points in our journey, and one of those was around about when we got to about 40 people, and overnight the organization just felt a little different. It felt like it just started to feel like a small business as opposed to a startup. I mean, we still consider ourselves a startup, but all of a sudden there was people joining who I had never met before, which was really odd because previously I'd met every single person. And we had to think quite deeply about how to set up different types of communication channels. And we had to think very deeply about how you maintain culture as the organization grows and scales. So I'd say over the past 18 months, like building communication and maintaining culture has preoccupied our minds more so than you would imagine. Right? People always think as founders, you're obsessed about building product and acquiring customers, and certainly that is a lot of what we do. But communication and culture becomes more topical as you grow.
Completely agree. Yeah, it's been personally extremely challenging year in terms of just figuring out how to grow myself in order to help lead this company. And like Kayla says, the nature of the challenge is very different to what it was a year ago. I feel like we're starting to see green shoots now, okay? We've definitely made some mistakes, but I feel like we're on a good wicket now.
Awesome. Yeah, it was reinforcing for me because what Brett came on and Brett's my business partner, as a golden nugget recently is really struggled to define the simple problem statement. And eventually we've got one that seems to be kind of working, and that's your team can't scale what's stuck in your head. And I think what you guys are talking about now is like crossing this boundary of 40 people. It really, culture, communication, it really becomes that shift and challenge. So thank you for the indirect reinforcement of what we're doing on our side. Guys, talk to me about the future, right? How are things playing out? I mean, you're busy closing a funding round. I'd be surprised if Netherlands is not part of your growth strategy right now, from what I hear about what's happening with their energy at the moment. Maybe the UK too. I don't know. Wherever there's basically load shedding is like, and transitions to solar. Yeah, talk to me about the near term future. What does the next 6 to 18 months look like for Jon, Kailas, and Plentify?
I mean, firstly, it'll be great to get this fundraising process behind us. It's definitely been very time intensive, and it'll be good to getting back to building the business. But we're bullish about the next 18 months. I'd say there's 3 major things that we want to do. Number one, we want to expand our product ecosystem beyond the current appliances that we control today. We'd like to ultimately control all appliances in the home in the same way, connected up to our home energy management platform. So that's going to involve investing in the engineering team to help blow that out. Secondly, we're very bullish in South Africa, and we continue to be. We see a lot of growth potential here. In the channels that we mentioned before, the property and solar sectors, but potentially some new channels as well. South Africa is, as we talked about earlier, is just undergoing this incredible transition in the energy sector. And I think that's going to result in a lot of new business models and opportunities to be captured. And I think we want to be poised to do that. And then lastly, international expansion. And we believe that what we're building is quite unique and novel and has relevance in multiple markets. We've identified what those markets are, and we have been successful in securing a few pilots in foreign geographies. And it'll be up to us over the next while to convert those pilots into commercial contracts and hopefully start to scale in markets outside of SA.
Goes back full circle to what you said slightly earlier when I was like, what's your biggest constraint to growth and achieving it back to the next 5 years? And like, future's in your hands. And actually on that note, seeing as we've got, I've had people on the podcast who have had employees because of the podcast. There's a cool story where someone actually put together an entire pitch plan and like marketing deck for one of the guests on the podcast. Donkey Longtongue was them, and yeah, they appointed that person basically the next week. So maybe we can do the same thing for you as you rapidly scale, guys. What kind of talent are you looking for at the moment?
I mean, we have talent leads across the organization lined up with those strategic goals that I mentioned just now. I think in terms of growing in South Africa, we'd love to have business development executives and commercial leaders join that side of the Plentify organization. We've got a very bold, ambitious goal for South Africa, and we'd like to have the right talent to help us get there. And then secondly, if there's folks that are experienced in scaling technologies like ours into international markets, now's the time to talk. There's, I think, a unique opportunity here for taking some homegrown South African technology into some foreign countries. And yeah, I think it'll be a great experience for whoever puts up their hand for that.
And then in addition to that, if you're a kick-ass engineer, we'd love to meet you. We've got 2 engineering roles open at the moment, which is a senior embedded systems engineer. If you've worked in Zephyr before, in particular, we want to talk with you. And then secondly, a junior integration engineer. But keep an eye on plentify.io/careers because we put new job notices up all the time. And then on the operations side, we're hiring for a field operations manager and a chief of staff to the COO at the moment.
Epic, guys. Well, hopefully this podcast would help a lot with that. And while we're on the topic, I guess all entrepreneurs are very open to loving serendipity. If there's someone, whoever they might be, out in the audience right now, I mean, you're busy closing your round, so I don't think you necessarily need new investors right now. I'm assuming you're just in final DD steps with the ones that are going to be buying in. But yeah, what else do you need right now? What else kind of help are you looking for besides talent?
Well, I mean, I guess if we'd like to serve more customers, obviously. So if you're a property owner or property developer of large residential properties and potentially considering installing solar and batteries, you definitely need to speak to us. We can help improve the economics of that decision for you. And then anybody really in the residential solar game, if you haven't considered adding Plentify to your offering, I think you might be getting left behind. So we're allowed to speak to folks in that space as well.
I've written 3 names down that I'll share with you offline
Brilliant.
immediately that I can hopefully introduce you to. Gents, thank you for being on the Founder Files. I'm going to end this off as I do every episode, but what's the one question that I haven't asked you, that I should have asked you, that you'd like to answer now?
I mean, I've got one for you. I think the question you should ask is, if you're potentially in a corporate job somewhere, and you've always had this inkling that you'd like to try your hand at founding your own company, should you do it? And I'd say to that, I'd say absolutely. And the earlier the better, to be honest. Like I think the lessons that you learn and the experience and the skill sets that you build, I truly believe are incredibly enduring. So no matter what happens in the world, you know, bots can come take our jobs. Knowledge workers are rapidly seeing like the infiltration of AI. I believe like some fundamental truths will still remain. If you can build something that people love, and you can sell it to the people, and do some good along the way, you'll be fine no matter what happens in the world. So definitely take the leap into founding your own company.
Jon?
Sure, that was a good one, Kay. Maybe a question, maybe like this about founder, more about domain. Are we going to have load shedding forever? Could be the question. And I would say that the answer to that will be no. And it will be solved hopefully by the energy transition through the proliferation of particularly distributed renewables deployed by the private sector, and then load management on the demand side. And the combination of those two things has the potential to set South Africa up not just to solve the energy crisis, but also to drive down the carbon intensity of manufacturing and ultimately position South Africa to be highly competitive in the global marketplace, as opposed to the alternative path, which is double down on coal, increase the carbon content of your goods, and get taxed through carbon border adjustments. So I think this energy transition holds a lot of hope for South Africans in terms of improving quality of life, but also it's the key to unlocking South Africa's potential.
Again, to just throw it out in the universe there, who's the kind of person that you would need to chat to, or what door would you need unlocked in order to help you accelerate that journey? Like, who in the podcast and their like degrees of connections could connect you with someone to do that?
I think ultimately it comes down to distribution. So anybody who's got a gigantic pipe to lots of homes, we want to talk to you. Whether that's a solar pipe or a property development pipe or some sort of other pipe, we'll help you increase your value and also deliver more impact.
Cool, guys. Thank you for being on the Founder Files. Yeah, genuinely, I can't wait to see you just continue to thrive. And I look forward to round 2 in a couple months or years.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Cameron. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Cameron.
All right. If you've made it all the way to the end, then you've probably heard me talk about the Founder Roadmap already. But, if you want to figure out why you should spend 15 minutes on it, I'm going to tell you all about it again right now. I want to chat to you about something that I've built specifically just for you as the audience of the podcast, right? As a thank you for being here and for continuously supporting us, I built something called the Founder Roadmap. It's something that I've built off of the 130 so podcast episodes I've done, and having worked with over 150 clients to date, there's a common bunch of patterns that I've seen that lead to where money is being leaked out of a business, where your time and energy is being spent and wasted. And I've consolidated that into an assessment of about 20 questions where you get to see exactly the impact that the areas of strategic focus, execution, cash, people, and how you manage your own energy can really lead to some of the pain points and problems and challenges that you might be facing in the business. But not just around diagnosis, it's also going to give you suggested next moves that have been battle tested by all the founders that I've worked with and spoken to. So you can build your own success roadmap over the next 90 days to actually work on these issues that have been pointed out. And what's the catch? There is none. It's totally free. There is no email sign up because I'm not trying to build a list, and it's only going to take you about 15 minutes to do from end to end. So if you want to take the insights that you're getting from this podcast, turn that into action, you probably want to click on the link in the description below, or go to roadmap.metavolve.co. And you'll be able to complete that roadmap now in 15 minutes and see exactly where you are leaking time, energy, and cash.